Korea of fire and fury and power, the likes of which this world has never seen before. Those lines were delivered off the cuff. And now there's a new response from Pyongyang, a threatening statement from the commander of Kim Jong-un's strategic forces. Speaking of President Trump, he said, quote, "Sound dialogue is not possible with such a guy bereft of reason, and only absolute force can work on him." He went on to outline upcoming military action, including a plan to be ready just days from now, he says, for targeting Guam with enveloping missile fire to land a number of miles short of the island. Now, whether you call it an especially aggressive test or a shot across the bow, it is, at the very least, a new and specific threat a day after the president warned that the next threat would be answered with that fire and fury. Our Barbara Starr begins our coverage tonight from the Pentagon. So, Barbara, the statement from North Korea also seemed to basically just mock the president.
It really did, Anderson. It only took a few hours for the North Koreans to respond, but they were very flowery, shall we say, in their language. Let me just read one part of it to everyone. The North Korean statement saying the U.S. president at the golf links again let out a load of nonsense about fire and fury, failing to grasp the ongoing grave situation. So, we now have the North Koreans and Donald Trump exchanging insults as perhaps only they can, Anderson.
And the Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, he issued a pretty stern warning in North Korea today.
Very serious-minded in comparison to what we saw from others. The Secretary of Defense, let me also read some of what he said, very, very stern, saying, and I quote, "The DPRK, North Korea, should cease any consideration of actions that would lead to the end of its regime and the destruction of its people. The DPRK's regime actions will continue to be grossly overmatched by ours and would lose any arms race or conflict it initiates." Perhaps look at that very last word, conflict it initiates. The Secretary making very clear the U.S. is not going to tolerate North Korea launching an attack.
But Secretary of State Rex Tillerson today seemed to be trying to kind of dial down the temperature in the wake of the president's comments yesterday.
Right. Everyone is wondering, is this the good cop, bad cop routine? Have a listen for a minute to what the Secretary of State had to say.
So I think what the president was doing is sending a strong message to North Korea in language that Kim Jong-un would understand, because he doesn't seem to understand diplomatic language. I think the president just wanted to be clear to the North Korean regime that the U.S., unquestionable ability to defend itself, will defend itself and its allies. And I think it was important that he deliver that message to avoid any miscalculation on their part.
So the Secretary of State, very calming voice there. The Secretary of Defense warning about the prospect of war. Good cop, bad cop. The State Department today insisted everyone is on the same page, that Mr. Tillerson is simply expressing the diplomatic portfolio, if you will, and the Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, looking at the military situation. Anderson?
All right, Barbara, thanks. As if to erase any doubts that the fire and fury remarks did in fact refer to nuclear war, the president began the day by tweeting about the American nuclear stockpile, saying the nuclear arsenal is, quote, far stronger and more powerful than ever before. And in keeping with his track record, what he said turns out that it isn't quite true. CNN Jeff Zeleny joins us now with the tweets, the facts, and all the rest of the statement. So, Jeff, let's talk about this latest threat from North Korea. Do we expect a response from the White House or the president tonight for this newest threat?
Anderson, so far the White House has given no indication that they plan to respond to this tonight. The president has not as well. This is something that some advisors to the president and to this White House are hoping that he passes on this opportunity. The one way to cool down this escalating back and forth series of exchanges here is for the president to not respond. So we do not know if he will, but we are told there isn't anything immediate plan. But of course, watch your social media feed, because that is one place he could respond here. But Anderson, the language was directed specifically seemed to me to get under the president's skin. We'll see if it does that or not. But they did not respond yesterday, the White House did not, to the Guam threat. So we do not expect anything, at least imminently, tonight, Anderson.
What more do we know about the statement that the president made yesterday?
Well, Anderson, it's so interesting because the president was speaking off the cuff. He was improvising. I was told by 3 White House officials today. Initially, they wouldn't say, but finally, as the day wore along, they did say that he was speaking extemporaneously. He was simply answering a question that was asked of him at Bedminster yesterday. But it is also the White House was, working very hard to explain that look, no one inside his inner circle, his new chief of staff John Kelly, was surprised by this. They say his military advisors weren't surprised by this because he has used similar language in private. But of course, saying it in public is so much different. So it's always hard to know, Anderson, if the White House is coming up with a strategy to fall into line after the president says something. They've often said that he's simply improvising, or if this was indeed the plan all along. But he is surrounded in Bedminster by his national security officials, and the vice president is traveling to Bedminster tomorrow. At least he's scheduled to as well. But Anderson, no question, this is the biggest foreign policy challenge that's now sitting on the president's desk. We'll see what he does with it.
Yeah, Jeff, thanks very much. So that's the state of play as North Korea tonight crosses rhetorically, at least, the red line that the president drew, again, off the cuff, just a bit more than 24 hours ago. Joining us now is former Defense Secretary William Cohen. He served during the Clinton administration, is currently CEO of the Cohen Group, a global consulting firm that represents defense contractors and others. Secretary Cohen, first of all, your reaction to this response now from North Korea tonight, specifically referencing the president's comments yesterday, spelling out a possible strike directed near Guam.
Well, I think it's an example of ad libitum peril. That when you improvise without really vetting this through your national security team and have an interagency process so everybody knows exactly what will be said, then you run the risk that we saw yesterday that the president made a statement indicating that a mere threat would be met with a very overwhelming, and the implication was, nuclear response. Secretary Tillerson had to tamp down. And he came out and made the right statement by saying, let's take a step back, let's ease off a minute, and we're not in any peril at the moment, so let's see if diplomacy can't work. Now, Secretary Mattis made a statement today, which I think was the correct one that should have been made by President Trump. And that is to say, you are playing with fire, that you're really escalating the danger in the Korean Peninsula area and the entire region, and that if you do take any action, as opposed to threats, if you take any action, it'll be met with a response that will probably end your regime. Now, I have made statements to that same effect, and that is our policy. But I think when you start issuing statements that if you even threaten us, we're going to destroy you, then I think you've got a problem in terms of what the reaction is going to be. I think the North Koreans have taken it as a bluff, and now you have them escalating the rhetoric. And now we have a situation where we've got, two schoolyard bullies as such, kind of say, I've got a bigger gun than you got, or my gun is worse than your gun, or more nuclear than what you have. So I think it's something that has to be calmed down. Rex Tillerson, Secretary Tillerson, has done the right thing. I think we have to go from here and then really put the pressure on the North Koreans by doing what needs to be done, and that's squeezing them economically far more than we've ever done before. President Trump deserves credit for getting this resolution through the Security Council last week, but don't undercut it with improvisations and off-the-cuff statements, which are only going to undercut it.
It's interesting, though, because, this president seems obsessed with the idea that people are laughing at him, or people are laughing at us, the U.S. It's something he's talked about as president a number of times. It's a phrase he used repeatedly when he was a civilian and tweeting. When you were Secretary of Defense, and now it seems like North Koreans, in fact, are kind of mocking in this statement, perhaps intentionally. When you were Secretary of Defense under President Clinton, did he speak with you about big picture strategy and language in situations like this before actually speaking publicly?
We always were very careful in what we said. Anytime you're dealing at this level with a country like North Korea, or any country, you need to be very precise and very concise and to the point, and not leave too much ambiguity. Now, Dr. Kissinger has been an advisor from time to time to President Trump, and Henry Kissinger wrote in his White House years, he said, a bluff taken seriously can be helpful, but a serious threat that's taken as a bluff can be catastrophic. That's similar language used by Dean Acheson years before. And so what we have now is something has been taken as a bluff. when it may in fact be serious. So we now have to kind of walk it back and say, if you take action which threatens us or our allies, then you will have a response which will be quite devastating to your regime. And we start moving from the region of saying, oh, we're not really trying to have a regime change. We will start moving in that direction, saying we tried to work with you, it's untenable, therefore we're going to look at regime change at some point in time in the not too distant future if you continue along this way.
You talked about squeezing North Korea, and I know earlier today you used the term squeezing them like a python. Can you explain exactly what you mean by that? I mean, are you talking about continuation of the sanctions, which were just passed, as you pointed out, unanimously on the Security Council on Saturday? How do you mean by squeeze?
Well, what I mean is we've been imposing sanctions on an incremental basis, a little at a time. And those sanctions have been evaded or eroded. We know that there is a black market and a gray market. We know that there are Chinese firms that are dealing with the North Koreans and the Russians. And what I've said before is we've allowed the North Koreans to have a gun and butter policy. They've been developing the guns or the missiles, and others have been providing them with the butter. And you need to take the butter away. You need to really shut down their economic benefits so that there is pain that is suffered. And with an indication it's going to get even worse. That, coupled with more defensive equipment that we need to have in South Korea. For example, President Moon of South Korea has put on hold the deployment of the THAAD missile, anti-missile system. He needs to accelerate that, put it on the ground now, no more hesitation. I think we ought to put it in Japan as well. So we have a beefed up defensive capability, squeezing them economically, telling our friends who are doing business with North Korea, it's going to have an impact. We're not going to be quite as good to you in the future, because you're actually aiding an adversary, which may become an enemy.
Yeah, Secretary Cohen, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Coming up next, our panel of national security and political experts weigh in. Later, the Russia story and the pre-dawn raid on Paul Manafort's home. Not his business, his home. That's serious stuff. Sources tell us it's rattling cages in the president's inner circle. Should they be considered? Should they be rattled? Concerned? Jeff Toobin says yes. Details on that ahead.
Erin Burnett out front. Stories that matter.
You've got the money and you've got the passion, but how do you actually make a difference?